The crystal wine glasses caught the light from our dining room chandelier as I set the last plate on the table. Christmas Eve dinner for 15 people. The prime rib sat in the center, maybe a shade darker than perfect, but still beautiful, still edible, still something I'd worked on for hours. "Sarah," David's voice boomed from the living room where his family was gathered. "Get in here." My stomach clenched. That tone, I knew that tone. I smoothed my red dress, the one he'd picked out because it made me look presentable, and walked into the room where his entire extended family sat sipping wine and making small talk. 15 pairs of eyes turned to me. David stood by the fireplace, his face already red with anger. "Tell everyone what you did to dinner," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. The room went quiet. His mother, Eleanor, perked up in her chair, always ready for drama. His sister, Jessica, smirked. His brother Mike looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "I don't understand," I whispered, knowing it was the wrong thing to say before the words left my mouth. "The meat, Sarah, you ruined it. Again." David gestured dramatically toward the dining room. "My family comes over once a year, and you can't even cook a simple roast without destroying it." Heat flooded my cheeks. "It's just a little well done, but it's still." "A little well done?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It looks like charcoal. My mother specifically asked for medium rare." Eleanor nodded sagely from her wingback chair. "David, darling, you really should have married someone who can actually cook. Poor thing probably never learned proper kitchen skills." The family chuckled, actual laughter at my expense. Jessica whispered something to her husband that made him snort. Mike's wife covered her mouth to hide a smile. "I'm sorry," I said, the words automatic after 7 years of marriage. "I can try to trim the edges, make it more." "Don't bother," David cut me off. "You've already embarrassed me enough. Just serve it and we'll all pretend it's edible." The shame burned through me like acid. I turned toward the kitchen, desperate to escape their stares, their barely contained laughter at the woman who couldn't even cook meat properly. The woman David was stuck with. The woman who embarrassed him in front of his family. That's when I heard the small voice from the doorway. "Daddy." Every head in the room turned toward my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. She stood in the archway between the living room and hallway, still in her Christmas pajamas, her dark hair falling around her shoulders. In her hands, she held her tablet, the one David bought her for her birthday. "What, sweetheart?" David's voice transformed instantly. Warm, loving, the perfect father voice he used when people were watching. Lily stepped into the room, her green eyes serious in a way that made something cold settle in my stomach. She looked too old, too knowing for her years. "Grandma Eleanor called," she said, her voice calm and steady. The room went completely silent. Eleanor, David's mother, was sitting right there in her chair, confusion flickering across her face. "I'm right here, dear," Eleanor said, glancing between Lily and David. "I haven't called anyone." But David had gone completely still. The color was draining from his face like water from a broken glass. "What are you talking about, Lily?" he asked, but his voice cracked on her name. Lily tilted her head, studying her father with the intensity of someone much older than 8. "The other Grandma Eleanor, your real mom, the one you don't talk to anymore." The silence in the room was deafening. David's family exchanged confused glances. His mother, Eleanor, looked offended, his sister Jessica looked lost, and Mike was frowning like he was trying to solve a puzzle. But David looked like he'd seen a ghost. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She wants to talk to you," Lily continued, her small voice carrying a weight that made the air in the room shift. "About the videos." And that's when David went completely white. His wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Red wine spread across the floor like blood. "What videos?" Eleanor asked, but her voice sounded far away. Lily's eyes never left her father's face. "The ones I've been sending her. Of you and Mommy. She said to tell you she's seen everything now." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His family was staring at him, then at Lily, then back at him, trying to understand what was happening. But I knew. Looking at my daughter's calm face, her steady hands holding that tablet, I suddenly understood that something had been happening. Something I knew nothing about. Something that was about to change everything. "She's on her way," Lily said simply. That's when David started to shake. 3 hours earlier, I stood in the same kitchen, my hands trembling as I basted the prime rib for the 4th time. The timer showed 2 more hours until David's family arrived, but I was already exhausted, already afraid. The bruise on my shoulder from last week was hidden under my long sleeves. The one on my ribs was still tender when I reached too high for the good china. David called them reminders, little lessons about what happened when I disappointed him. "Sarah, where the hell are my cufflinks?" His voice boomed from upstairs, and I flinched despite knowing it was coming. "In your jewelry box, honey. Top drawer left side," I called back, my voice carefully modulated to avoid setting him off. Lily sat at the kitchen island, supposedly working on a puzzle, but I could feel her watching me. She always watched now. Those intelligent green eyes tracked my every movement, cataloged every flinch, every careful word designed to keep the peace. "Mommy," she said quietly, "why does your hand shake when Daddy yells?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I wondered if she noticed? How many times had I told myself she was too young to understand? "Daddy's just stressed about tonight, sweetheart," I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. "He wants everything to be perfect for his family." Lily's puzzle piece remained suspended in her small hand. "Is that why you're wearing makeup on your arm?" I looked down. I'd been so careful, but the concealer on my shoulder must have smudged when I changed shirts. An 8-year-old had noticed what I'd hoped no adult would see. "I fell," I said automatically, the lie I'd practiced. "You know how clumsy Mommy is." "You fall a lot," Lily observed, her voice too matter-of-fact for a child. "Always when Daddy's upset." Before I could respond, David's footsteps thundered down the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, adjusting his tie, already dressed in his expensive Christmas sweater. The one that made him look like the perfect family man. "Lily, baby girl," he said, his voice warm and loving. He scooped her up in a hug that looked picture-perfect from the outside. "Are you excited to see all your aunts and uncles and cousins?" "Yes, Daddy," she said, but her eyes found mine over his shoulder. There was something in her expression I couldn't read, something that looked almost like calculation. David sat her down and turned his attention to me. The warmth disappeared from his face instantly. "The house looks decent," he said, scanning the kitchen with critical eyes. "But what's that smell?" My heart sank. What smell? "Something's burning, or overcooking. Jesus, Sarah, you had one job today, one simple job." I rushed to check the oven. The roast looked fine, perfect even, but I pulled it out anyway, adjusting the temperature down. "It's fine, David. It's going to be perfect." "It better be." His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper I'd learned to fear. "My mother specifically requested medium rare. You know how she is about food." I knew Eleanor Brooks, David's mother, had opinions about everything, especially about the woman her son had settled for. She made sure I knew that David could have done better, that he deserved better. "Everything will be wonderful," I promised, the words coming automatically after 7 years of managing his moods, his expectations, his family's judgment. The doorbell rang, and David immediately transformed. His shoulders straightened, his face brightened, and he became the charming host everyone expected. "Showtime," he murmured to me, but there was a threat in his voice. "Remember, we're the perfect family tonight. Loving husband, devoted wife, happy child. Can you manage that, Sarah?" "Yes," I whispered. "And Lily," he turned to our daughter, "you be good for Daddy tonight, okay? No interrupting when the grown-ups are talking." Lily nodded solemnly. "I'll be very good, Daddy." But there was something in her voice, some edge I didn't recognize. David's family descended on our home like a swarm of well-dressed critics. Eleanor swept in first, her silver hair perfectly styled, her judgmental gaze immediately scanning the decorations, the table settings, my end appearance. "Sarah, dear," she said, air-kissing my cheek, "you look tired. Are you sleeping well?" Before I could answer, she'd moved on, critiquing the centerpiece I'd spent 2 hours arranging. Jessica arrived next with her husband and 2 teenagers, both wearing designer clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Smells interesting in here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mike and his wife brought wine and subtle condescension. "Sarah, you've done something different with your hair," his wife said. "It's so bold." I'd cut it myself to save money. David had been furious about the expense when I'd mentioned going to a salon. Throughout the next hour, as they settled into our living room with drinks and appetizers, I felt the familiar weight of their judgment. Every comment was designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, at the bottom. But Lily was watching it all, sitting quietly in the corner with her tablet, those sharp green eyes missing nothing, taking in every slight, every cruel comment disguised as concern, every moment her father failed to defend me. When I caught her eye once, she gave me a small smile that looked almost sad, almost sorry. Like she knew something I didn't. Like she was preparing for something I couldn't imagine. Dinner began like a choreographed dance of subtle cruelty. David carved the prime rib with theatrical precision, while his family took their seats around our dining room table. I'd spent days planning the seating arrangement, trying to minimize conflict, trying to create an atmosphere where maybe, just maybe, they might treat me with basic human dignity. I was wrong. "Sarah, this looks lovely," Alina said, examining her plate with the intensity of a food critic, though perhaps a bit overdone for my taste. The meat was perfectly cooked. I knew it was, but her disapproval was already spreading around the table like a virus. David's jaw tightened, and I knew I'd pay for this later. "It's fine, Mom," David said, but his voice carried that edge that meant it wasn't fine at all. Nothing was ever fine when his family found fault with me. Jessica, David's younger sister, took a delicate bite and smiled that sharp smile she'd perfected over the years. "Sarah, you're still not working outside the home, right?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but I knew the trap it contained. "I work at home. I take care of Lily and manage the household." "Oh, of course," Jessica interrupted with a laugh. "I meant real work, career work. It must be nice to have David support your lifestyle." The word lifestyle dripped with disdain. Around the table, David's relatives exchanged knowing glances. This was their favorite game. Make Sarah feel small while pretending to be concerned family members. "Some women choose to prioritize family," I said carefully, knowing anything I said would be wrong. Mike, David's older brother, leaned back in his chair with his wine glass. "Remember when Sarah tried to go back to school? What was that, 3 years ago? Some kind of nursing program?" My chest tightened. I had been accepted. I had dreams of financial independence, of a career that mattered. But David had. "That was a disaster waiting to happen," Alina chimed in, cutting through my thoughts. "Sarah, dear, you have to be realistic about your capabilities. Some women just aren't cut out for that kind of pressure." David nodded slowly. "Sarah knows her priorities now. Family comes first." But that wasn't how it had happened. David had filled out the withdrawal papers while I was at Lily's school conference. He'd told the program director I'd had a breakdown, couldn't handle the stress. He'd convinced me I was too stupid to succeed, that I'd embarrass him by failing. "Besides," Jessica continued, "Melissa here just made partner at her law firm. Tell everyone about your promotion, Mel." Mike's wife beamed, launching into a story about her success while I sat silent, serving vegetables and refilling wine glasses. Every word she spoke was a reminder of what I wasn't, what I'd never be allowed to become. "It's wonderful," I said genuinely when she finished. Despite everything, I was happy for any woman succeeding. "Congratulations." Alina's eyebrows rose. "It is wonderful, isn't it? So refreshing to see a woman with actual drive and intelligence. Don't you think so, Sarah?" The barb hit its mark perfectly. Around the table, David's family watched me like spectators at a gladiator match, waiting to see if I'd fight back or simply take it. Lily had stopped eating entirely. She sat perfectly still in her chair, her tablet in her lap under the table, her small hands working at something I couldn't see. Her face was calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I think intelligence comes in many forms," I said quietly. "Taking care of a family, managing a home, raising children." "Oh, please," Jessica laughed. "That's what women said 50 years ago to make themselves feel better about having no ambition." David's cousin added, "My wife manages a household and has a successful business. It's about motivation." "Some people just exist," Mike said casually, as if he hadn't just reduced my entire life to that single, devastating word. "Content to just be." The word exist hung in the air like poison gas. Even Melissa looked uncomfortable with her husband's cruelty, but she said nothing. None of them ever said anything when the attacks went too far. "That's enough," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The table fell silent. David's eyes snapped to mine, and I saw the warning there. The danger. But 7 years of accumulated humiliation, of swallowed pride, of watching my daughter absorb these lessons about how women could be treated, it all came bubbling up at once. "I take care of all of you," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I cook your meals and clean your messes and smile while you tell me how worthless I am. I raise your brother's child and manage his household and support his career while you all sit here telling me I don't contribute anything." Alina's mouth fell open. Jessica looked genuinely shocked. But David's face was turning red, that vein in his temple starting to throb. "I had dreams once," I continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "I had plans and ambitions and intelligence that you've all spent years convincing me didn't exist. But they did exist. They still exist." "Sarah," David's voice was deadly quiet. "Stop now." "No," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. "I'm tired of stopping. I'm tired of shrinking myself so you can all feel bigger. I'm tired of being your family's acceptable target." Around the table, his relatives looked like they'd been slapped. They weren't used to me fighting back. For 7 years, I'd been the perfect victim, quiet, apologetic, grateful for any scrap of acceptance they threw my way. But Lily was watching. My 8-year-old daughter was absorbing every word, learning what women deserved, what they should accept, how small they should make themselves to keep men comfortable. And I was done teaching her that lesson. "I'm tired of pretending that your cruelty is normal," I said. "I'm tired of letting you tear me apart for entertainment." David stood up so violently that his chair tipped backward. "That's enough." The room erupted into chaos. Alina was gasping dramatically, Jessica was calling me ungrateful, and Mike was shaking his head like I'd lost my mind. But Lily sat perfectly still, her tablet hidden in her lap, her green eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride. And I realized, in that moment of standing up for myself, that I might have just signed my own death warrant. David's face had gone from red to purple, that vein in his temple pulsing like a warning beacon. He stood at the head of the table, his hands clenched into fists, his expensive Christmas sweater making him look like a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Kitchen," he said, his voice so low and controlled it made my blood freeze. "Now." I knew that tone. I knew what it meant. My brave moment of standing up for myself was about to have consequences, and his family would witness every second of it. "David," Alina said nervously, "perhaps we should all just calm down." "Stay out of this, Mother," he snapped, never taking his eyes off me. "My wife needs to remember her place." I stood on shaking legs, my brief moment of courage evaporating like steam. Around the table, his family watched with the fascination of people observing a car crash they couldn't look away from. "Please," I whispered, "not in front of." "Move." The single word carried so much threat that I actually stumbled backward. I walked toward the kitchen on unsteady legs, David following close behind. But instead of the private confrontation I expected, he started speaking before we even left the dining room. his voice rising with each word. 7 years, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 7 years I've put up with your dramatic outbursts, your inability to handle basic social situations, your constant need to embarrass me. We reached the kitchen, but the swinging door remained open. His family could see everything, hear everything, and I realized with growing horror that this was intentional. This was part of the punishment. "David, please," I said, backing toward the counter. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "You didn't mean what?" "To humiliate me in front of my family. To act like some kind of victim when all we did was have a normal conversation." His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging in like a vice. I could feel the bruises forming already, adding to the collection he'd been building on my body for years. "You're hurting me," I gasped. "I'm teaching you," he corrected, twisting my wrist until I cried out. "Teaching you what happens when you forget who's in charge of this family." Through the open doorway, I could see his relatives in the dining room. Eleanor looked uncomfortable but made no move to help. Jessica was watching with dark fascination. Mike was staring down at his plate, but he wasn't leaving. None of them was leaving. They were going to watch this happen and do nothing. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Not like this, not in front of everyone." "Especially in front of everyone," David snarled. He shoved me backward, and I stumbled into the kitchen counter, my hip hitting the granite edge hard enough to leave another bruise. "So they can see what happens when you don't show proper respect." That's when Lily appeared in the doorway. "Daddy," she said, her small voice cutting through his rage like a blade. "Stop hurting Mommy." David whirled around, his face twisted with fury. "Go to your room, Lily. This doesn't concern you." But Lily didn't move. She stood in the doorway with her tablet clutched against her chest, those green eyes fixed on her father with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, unafraid. "It does concern me," she said calmly, "because you're hurting my mom." "Your mother brought this on herself," David said, advancing toward Lily with the same menacing energy he directed at me. "She needs to learn." He reached for our daughter, and something inside me snapped. Whatever fear had paralyzed me, whatever conditioning had kept me passive for 7 years, it all broke apart at the sight of his hands reaching for my child. "Don't you touch her," I screamed, throwing myself between them. David's backhand caught me across the face with a sound like a gunshot. The force of it sent me spinning into the kitchen island, my head connecting with the marble countertop. Stars exploded across my vision as I slumped to the floor. The dining room had gone completely silent. Through my blurred vision, I could see David's family frozen in their chairs, finally understanding what they'd been enabling all these years. David stood over me, his chest heaving, his face still twisted with rage. "Keep your mouth shut," he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Keep it shut or next time will be worse." Blood was running down my face from where my head had hit the counter. My cheek was already swelling from his hand, and his family sat 20 feet away, doing absolutely nothing. But Lily knelt beside me, her small hand touching my shoulder gently. Her tablet was in her other hand, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made the entire house feel like it was holding its breath. "Too late, Daddy," she said with devastating calm. "Grandma Eleanor already knows everything." David's face went white as paper. "That's impossible," he whispered. Lily looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than 8 years. "She's on her way." That's when we heard the car doors slamming in the driveway. 2 months earlier, I had no idea my 8-year-old daughter was planning to save my life. I found out by accident, walking past her bedroom door one Tuesday evening when she was supposed to be doing homework. Instead, I heard her small voice through the crack in the door, talking to someone on her tablet. "Grandma Eleanor, what would you do if someone were hurting your daughter?" My blood turned to ice. David's mother was downstairs watching television. Who was my daughter talking to? "I mean, really hurting her," Lily continued, her voice serious in that way that made her sound older than her years. "Like, every day, making her scared all the time." I pressed my ear to the door, my heart hammering. "Well, sweetheart," came a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. Crisp, intelligent, with the kind of authority that commanded instant respect. "Anyone who hurt my daughter would have to answer to me. Why do you ask?" Alina Brooks Mitchell, David's real mother. The woman he'd forbidden me from ever contacting. The woman who'd been cut out of our lives when she'd called David's behavior controlling and concerning during our engagement. "Just wondering," Lily said, but I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. "Grandma Alina, do you miss us?" There was a long pause. "Every single day, baby girl, every single day." I stumbled away from the door, my mind reeling. How had Lily even contacted her? How long had they been talking? And why hadn't she told me? The answer came the next morning, when I found Lily in the kitchen before school, typing carefully on her tablet. "Lily," I said gently, sitting beside her, "who were you talking to last night?" She looked up at me with those green eyes that missed nothing, and I saw her make a decision. "Grandma Alina," she said simply. "Daddy's real mom, the one he doesn't talk to anymore." "How did you?" "Mrs. Patterson next door helped me look her up," Lily said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Patterson was our elderly neighbor who'd always been kind to us, who sometimes watched Lily when I had doctor's appointments for injuries I couldn't explain. "She's a judge, Mom, a really important one." My head was spinning. "Lily, you can't just call people without permission. And your father." "Daddy lied about her," Lily interrupted, her voice taking on that edge of adult knowledge that made my stomach clench. "He said she didn't want to see us anymore, but that's not true. She's been looking for us." Over the following weeks, I learned the truth in fragments. David's mother, Alina Brooks Mitchell, was a retired family court judge who'd spent 30 years dealing with domestic violence cases. She'd raised David alone after his father died, tried to teach him respect for women, tried to instill values of protection and strength. When David started dating me, Alina had seen warning signs immediately. His need to control my appearance, my friends, my choices. He subtly says of isolating me from my support system. His an explosive temper when challenged. She'd tried to talk to him, tried to talk to me, tried to prevent what she saw coming. David's response had been swift and brutal. He'd accused her of trying to sabotage his happiness. He'd convinced his family that Alina was jealous, manipulative, and trying to control his life. He'd painted her as the villain in our story while systematically cutting off all contact. For 5 years, she'd been searching for ways to reconnect with us, but David had been careful. New phone numbers, social media blocks, instructions to mutual acquaintances that Alina was unstable and obsessed. But he hadn't counted on an 8-year-old with unlimited internet access and a neighbor willing to help. "She wants to help us, Mom," Lily said one evening as I tucked her into bed. She'd been recording David's outbursts for weeks by then, though I didn't know it yet. "She says real families protect each other." "Lily, this is complicated. Adult relationships." "It's not complicated," she said with that frightening clarity she'd developed. "Daddy hurts you. Grandma Alina knows about people who hurt their families. She can make him stop." I wanted to argue with her, wanted to protect her from the harsh realities of our situation. But looking into her serious green eyes, I realized she already understood our reality better than I'd given her credit for. "What exactly have you been telling her?" I asked carefully. Lily was quiet for a long moment. "Everything," she said finally. "I told her everything, Mom, because someone has to protect us and the grown-ups in Daddy's family won't do it." That night after Lily fell asleep, I lay in bed next to David's snoring form and tried to process what I'd learned. Somewhere out there was a woman who'd been fighting for us for 5 years. A woman with legal knowledge, professional connections, and the power to actually help. A woman Dee Avid had systematically erased from our lives because she posed a threat to his control. The next morning, I found a text message on Lily's tablet. Just 4 words that changed everything. "I'm coming home, sweetheart." Alina Brooks Mitchell wasn't just a retired judge. She was a grandmother who'd been denied access to her granddaughter. She was a mother who'd watched her son become the kind of man she'd spent her career fighting against. And she was, according to Lily's careful research, exactly the kind of person who didn't back down from bullies. "She'll be here soon, Mom," Lily had said that morning, showing me Alina's photograph on her tablet. Steel gray hair, intelligent eyes, and a smile that suggested she'd faced down worse men than David and won. "How soon?" I'd asked. "Soon," Lily had said with absolute confidence. "She's just waiting for the right moment." As it turned out, Christmas Eve dinner was exactly the right moment. The front door didn't just open. It commanded attention like a judge entering a courtroom. Alina Brooks Mitchell stepped into our entryway with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. At 65, she was still striking. Silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, wearing a charcoal gray coat that screamed expensive and professional. Behind her stood two people who made David's family shift uncomfortably in their dining room chairs. A woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase, and a man with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Alina's gaze swept the scene before her with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades evaluating dangerous domestic situations. Me on the kitchen floor, blood still trickling from my head wound. David was standing over me like a predator caught in the act. His family, frozen in their chairs like guilty bystanders, was finally forced to witness their complicity. "Lily, sweetheart," Alina said, her voice warm and gentle as she addressed her granddaughter. "Come here, baby." Lily ran to her grandmother, who scooped her up in a fierce hug while never taking her eyes off David. The contrast was stark, tenderness for the child, steel for the man who'd kept them apart. "Hello, David," Alina said, setting Lily down but keeping her close. "You look terrible. Guilt doesn't suit you." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His commanding presence had evaporated completely, leaving behind a man who looked smaller by the second. "Mom," he finally managed. "What are you doing here? You can't just—" "I'm here," Alina interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench, "because my granddaughter sent me evidence of felony domestic violence being committed in this house." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's family began exchanging panicked glances, finally understanding that their family dinner had become a crime scene. "Evidence," David's voice cracked. "What evidence?" Alina nodded to the woman with the briefcase, who stepped forward and introduced herself with professional calm. "I'm Rebecca Chen, family court advocate and former prosecutor. I've reviewed approximately 6 weeks of video and audio documentation showing patterns of domestic violence, emotional abuse, and terroristic threatening." She opened her briefcase and pulled out printed photographs and video stills. David's face was in rage. My bruised arms. He threw a coffee mug at my head. Each image was time-stamped and dated. "This is inadmissible," David stammered, grasping for control. "You can't record in my house without consent." "Actually," the man stepped forward, showing his badge. "Detective Morris, County Sheriff's Office. In this state, one-party consent laws mean your daughter had every right to document crimes being committed against her mother in her presence." Alina's smile was sharp as a blade. "I raised you better than this, David. Your father would be ashamed." "You have no right to be here," David said, but his voice had lost all its authority. "You chose to cut yourself out of our lives." "I chose." Alina's voice rose for the first time, and the power in it made everyone in the room flinch. "You manipulated your family against me because I dared to suggest that controlling your fiancé's bank account and isolating her from her friends might be unhealthy behavior." She turned to address David's family directly, her courtroom experience evident in how she commanded the room. "You people sat here tonight and participated in the systematic humiliation of a woman you knew was being abused. You watched her husband strike her and did nothing. You are complicit in every bruise, every tear, every night she went to bed afraid." Alina's mother tried to speak. "We didn't know it was that serious." "You knew," Alina cut her off. "You all knew. You just chose to pretend otherwise because it was easier than confronting the monster you were enabling. Detective Morris stepped forward with papers in his hand. Mr. Whitman, I'm here to serve you with an emergency protective order. You are ordered to have no contact with your wife and daughter and to vacate this residence immediately. This is my house, David exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. My family, you can't just. This house, Rebecca Chen consulted her papers, is jointly owned, but given the documented evidence of domestic violence, your wife has been granted emergency exclusive occupancy. Alina walked over to me, helping me to my feet with gentle hands. Up close, I could see the fury burning in her eyes, but her touch was tender as she examined my injuries. Sarah dear, she said softly, I'm so sorry I couldn't get here sooner. I didn't know, I whispered through my swollen lips, about Lily calling you about any of it. That child, Alina said, glancing at Lily with fierce pride, has more courage than any of the adults in this room. She saved you both. David's family was quietly gathering their coats and purses, trying to slink away from the scene of their complicity. But Alina wasn't finished with them. Before you leave, she called out, and her judge's voice made them freeze. I want you to understand something. This isn't a family disagreement that got out of hand. This is systematic domestic violence that you witnessed and enabled. If any of you ever want a relationship with that remarkable little girl, you'll need to examine your own behavior and make amends. One by one, they filed out into the night, unable to meet my eyes or Lily's. David stood alone in the middle of his destroyed kingdom, watching 7 years of careful control crumble in a single evening.